Welcome to PolyCast, a civilization podcast focused on game strategy.
CanusAlbinus,
Makahlua,
the main team,
MegaBearsFan.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to PolyCast 399. We're so close. I'm your host, CanusAlbinus, and I'm here today with Makahlua.
This coffee cup does not hold enough. Why?
And MegaBearsFan.
Uh-oh, one episode away from the big 400.
Oh no.
That's okay. They say 400 is the new 300. I think we've made that joke before.
Yeah, I think when we said that with the new 300 is the new 200.
And I'm sure we'll make it again.
500 is the new 400. Yeah, we'll wait a few
500.
years for that.
500, oh my goodness.
Yeah, someday, perhaps. But first, Firaxis has to give us a new Civilization game, because,
Yeah.
Nah, what are you talking about? We got plenty of stuff to talk about.
Civ 4 forever.
Nervously shuffles papers in front of desk.
Yeah, that's about that size of that.
Well, yeah, because in lieu of, any new Civilization news or content coming out, I have had to dig deep into the barrel of other stuff, including previously talking about City Skylines issues, and now we actually have a Dark Souls issue that I want to bring up real quick, which is apparently From Software, the developer that makes the Dark Souls games, had to shut off the online components for all of the Dark Souls games on PC. I think it's all PC, not just Steam, like all PC versions. I don't know if it was available anywhere other than Steam. But if you were playing the Dark Souls games on Steam, you can no longer play any of the online functionality. And the reason for this is because there was a security exploit that would allow other multiplayer users to run remote code onto the other players' computers and essentially take complete control of the other player's computer in multiplayer. Thankfully, the person who found this exploit was a good Samaritan, tried to report it to From Software, but after not getting any official response from them, started doing this on streamers, to people streaming the game, and just doing fairly benign stuff like opening PowerShell and running text-to-speech things, just to tell them, like, hey, I'm able to do these things, while they were streaming to a public audience in order to raise awareness to the problem. But if this had been found by a malicious agent, like, oh my goodness, like, just imagine the things they could have done. And it's not directly related to Civ, but the reason I bring this up is because we have this increasing push from game developers and game publishers to make games more and more always online. And for games that are predominantly played as single player or who have a strong single player component, making your game always online is risky. And lately, with things like City Skylines, with the mod issue, and now with Dark Souls with this multiplayer exploit, it just exposes the fact that forcing online play into games that don't necessarily need it is not only unnecessary, but also potentially dangerous. So, unfortunately, we have to be careful what mods we download from the Steam Workshop, and now, apparently, we have to be careful what multiplayer games we play, because, stuff like this can happen.
Yeah, it is extremely lucky that was a white hat type of person and not somebody who really wanted to go after things. I mean,
go ahead.
No, that was a great way to get attention onto the problem, though, doing it to the streamers and doing something relatively harmless, like that.
We should also say that this happened back in middle of January, so it happened a while ago, but...
Yes, it did, but here we are also months later, and From Software has still not brought the multiplayer component for Dark Souls back online, at least not on PC. So there is now legitimate concern within the Dark Souls community that multiplayer on PC is just gone for good. Hopefully that's not the case, but it very well could be. Thankfully, as far as I know, consoles are not affected. I've been playing all my Dark Souls games on consoles, so I have been spared from this sort of thing. And as far as
multiplayer in Elden Ring.
Yeah, and as far as I know, this exploit was a PC-only exploit. Hopefully there is no analog in the console versions of the game, so if you are playing those games on consoles, you're probably hopefully safe, but, I mean, like, who knows, you know? These games were out, you know, the first Dark Souls, this exploit apparently affected all the Dark Souls games, and the first Dark Souls was released in, like, 2010, 2011, so this exploit was sitting around undetected for over a decade, so who knows what else is out there.
Yeah, somebody trying to hack it just for score reasons or whatever probably found it, and I'm guessing this means that Elden Ring was built from scratch off of a slightly different engine or something, so that's why they don't have to worry about it in there.
Well, or they just patched it because it was not out yet.
Yeah, I know From Software had released a public statement at the time that this had happened, saying that they were taking the Dark Souls multiplayer components offline so that they could focus on fixing the problem for Elden Ring, so that it would not be an Elden Ring when that game launched. But you know, again, who knows? Hopefully they fixed it in Elden Ring, and there could also be other vulnerabilities too, and not just with these games from this particular developer, but you know, any game for any developer. I mean, we have so many publishers now that are forcing in always online components and loot boxes and stuff like that. Like, I've been playing Gran Turismo 7 recently on the PS5, and that has an always online component. And in fact, they had an issue a few weeks ago where they did server maintenance and they broke the server, and the server was just offline for a whole day, and nobody could play the game, not even in single player, because the game has an always online requirement. So yeah, like I said, shoehorning this stuff in where it isn't necessary is apparently showing that it's more dangerous than we might have thought.
And just making it worse for the player experience, because if I'm just going to play single player stuff and I'm not going to play multiplayer, why should I be blocked from playing the game for a whole day just because you have a problem in multiplayer? That's stupid. There should be an option. Like Steam has offline mode, these games need to have an offline mode.
Well, it's funny because, again, talking about Dark Souls, like, Dark Souls is a game that was built around the idea of having, like, asynchronous multiplayer. Like, it's a really big part of the game's, like, core design. Mm-hmm. But that game, in its main menu, has the option to play offline.
So if they can figure that out and do that, Gran Turismo, guys, what?
Yeah, but this predominantly single-player, you know, racing game on a console, like, doesn't just have the option to not play online. So yeah, that sort of stuff is frustrating already, but when you add on the fact that this online component could potentially introduce, you know, loopholes and hacking threats, like, it just makes it seem all the more unnecessary. And hopefully Dark Souls is a big enough IP that, like, other companies take note of this and are maybe like, whoa, we should probably be a little bit more careful about putting stuff like this in our games in the future, so that hopefully this doesn't happen to other games or, you know, other developers and get caught by people who, you know, aren't good Samaritans, like the Dark Souls hacker who found this proved to be. But anyway, I guess we can talk about Civ now.
Yeah, well, digging back into things, article off of Gatecrashers is Civilization 4, the games that made us. So one of their columnists there has gone back to his childhood to explore his love for Civ 4, which we can all understand because, I don't think I had I don't think Civ 4 was on Steam, but I probably, if you added up my hours between Civ 5 and Civ 6, that's probably how many hours I put into Civ 4. And a lot of it was multiplayer too, interestingly enough. So, but I understand that because he also came from, he liked historical novels and movies and TV shows. So he saw Civ, like, ooh, history, but history I get to make, you know. So a lot of us started, and everybody gets hit with one more turn, you know. I mean, yeah. I think we've just, so there was, it just kept getting, it was interesting. It was good from the start, and it just kept getting better with each expansion. You know, and there's a lot of people that even though Civ 5 was really good once it got its third expansion, it started out a little rough. So there was people that kept on with Civ 4 until mid or late into Civ 5. And like, we have so many, I think we still have a lot of people who stuck with Civ 5 even compared to Civ 6.
I don't get the dislike for Civ 6, but it's pretty pronounced.
I think a lot of it had to do with knee-jerk reactions to, like, early issues that people had with even pre-release. A big one was, people complaining that the art style looked too cartoony and like a mobile game. And I think that kind of set a tone for people's reaction to the game when it finally did eventually launch. And then the other big thing, I think, was just a lot of people felt like it was just too similar to Civ 5. Like, oh, why stop playing Civ 5, which has, more content and a little more polish and, 2 expansions and all that stuff. I'll just wait until... I knew a lot of people who were basically saying, I'll wait until Civ 6 gets expansions. But then even when the expansions came, they just still never got around to playing it.
Yeah, I do remember. Now that you mention, I do remember the arguments about, it looks too cartoony. It's a game. It doesn't have to look perfectly realistic. Right. It's everybody's individual taste in art design.
And again, as I've said so many times on the show, is the reason for that particular art style was to make the main screen of the game more readable than it was in Civ 5, so that you don't have to go through a bunch of different menus and widgets and stuff to see what's going on in your cities, although, you still do have to do a lot of that stuff anyway. But the point was to communicate as much information on the main screen as possible, and I think Civ 6, with its art style, is exceedingly successful at doing that.
Yeah, especially since once they picked up the banners, I think that were originally something like a mod, had something very similar. It's like, oh yeah, we put those there, and now I can see what all the AI is making, and everybody, their culture per turn, their science per turn, and I know if I'm doing well or if, oh god, I'm so far behind, without having to dig through 10 menus.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to Civ 5 after playing Civ 6, for me, has been tough because of stuff like that. Like, not being able to see stuff that's under construction, not being able to see all the infrastructure that's in my cities, not being able to see all the infrastructure that's in opponent cities. Civ 6 made all that stuff easily readable and digestible, relatively speaking anyway. It could be better.
Yeah, but I think as somebody who wanted to have a throwback weekend, I think I could get back into Civ 4 easily, partly because of the number of hours I played, but while its interface is probably more cumbersome in that, trying to find everything, where's this go? Where'd that go? I'm so used to my little banner. But there's a reason that Civ 4 lasted for so long and had people putting so many hours for it, and it was also more easily moddable, and so there was a ton of things. There was complete conversions, like where it converted into a fantasy game, and there was like Rise and Fall, and even if you didn't play just plain normal Civ, you could still put hours of Civ time into things.
Oh yeah, for sure. I had to go back and replay some of Civ 4 and Civ 4 Colonization recently to capture footage for those, top 10 good and bad idea videos that we talked about in previous episodes. And I got totally sucked in. Like, I had to make myself stop after I got the footage that I needed so that I could actually have time to put the darn video projects together and not just end up spending the whole week playing Civ 4 and then falling behind on what I was supposed to actually be doing. Because, it still is that good of a game. Holds up very well. Yeah,
because he's also down in here talking about, we all love Sean Bean in Civ 6, but the first time we had the quotes read out was by Leonard Nimoy in Civ 4, and a lot of us still have those in our head. Like, you can hear them. You don't even have to see them. You can just see the text, and it will play in your head.
Yeah.
It was just the awesomest choice.
And I've been a huge lifelong Trekkie, so Leonard Nimoy has more authority for me than Sean Bean. The only narrator that they could probably get that could top Leonard Nimoy would be if maybe they got Patrick Stewart to do all the narration for a game.
That would be difficult.
Oh yeah, I doubt Firaxis could afford that.
Maybe the actress who played Janeway.
Oh, Kate Mulgrew.
Yeah, I could see something like that too.
That'd be a nice change of pace.
I mean, Kate Mulgrew is still...
female voice.
Yeah, but Kate Mulgrew is still no Leonard Nimoy.
Well, nobody except Leonard Nimoy is Leonard Nimoy.
That's true.
He had, unique unto himself. But he does point out that when you came into these things and, the first time you're playing through a civilization, you start building great wonders of the world. You build the pyramids, you build the Colosseum. You later on build things like the Statue of Liberty and stuff, and it's just this amazing feeling, and you get addicted to it, or not addicted so much, but you get hooked on it, and you just keep playing, and you keep coming back for each new iteration of Civ. we were talking about with Civ 5 to Civ 6, it's not necessarily everybody's taste, but Civ 4 is probably the most universally loved of all the Civs.
And a big part of that, too, like kind of comparing Civ 4 to Civ 6 a little bit, is Civ 4 also had that very immersive quality. You didn't build districts outside the city like you do in Civ 6, but still, in Civ 4, every piece of infrastructure that you built was depicted on the map as a 3D asset. Like, you built a barracks in your city, there was a 3D graphic of a barracks in your city. You built a monument, there it was, right in the middle of your city. Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, all the improvements you made, like the game had nice little different, assets or animations depending on whether that was being worked or not. Like if you had a little gold mine, right, and you weren't working it, it was just sitting there, just a gold mine not doing anything. But if you assigned a citizen to work that tile, there'd be little mine carts going in and out of it, like little torches illuminating it, so that you could see, like right there on the main screen, without even having to go into your city management screen, you could see that mine is being worked. I am getting the production from that mine, and I don't have to go to some other menu to see that. It just makes the world of Civ 4, and by extension the world of Civ 6, feel more alive and more immersive and more like, the things I'm doing, the world is reacting and responding to. And that just really helps make a game more engaging. And a Civ 5, unfortunately, as good as it was, lost a lot of that. Like, I think the only building that appeared on the map was the Colosseum buildings. Wonders had little graphics for them in the cities, so you would always see Wonders, but the only, regular building that I think showed up was the Colosseum and walls. Everything else you'd have to go into your city screen to see. And even then, unlike previous Civ games like Civ 2 and Civ 3, there was no, screen that showed a pretty picture of your whole city in Civ 5. It was just a bunch of icons on the side of the screen to tell you what was in there.
Yeah, so we got some of it back out of Civ 6. Maybe they'll take the hint, and Civ 7 will also continue in that vein and still have everything where you can see it on the map, so you know exactly where things are built. It is much nicer to have the wonders popped out so you can see where they are instead of going, what city, where? And
I do feel like, in defense of Civ 5, the fact that the Colosseum building was an asset that was, 3D model that would show up in the cities on the main map, tells me one of two things. Either, A, it was originally planned to be a wonder, so they created that graphic as a wonder graphic, and then just said, let's make it a regular building, and they just reused the asset because they had it. Alternatively, it could be a clue that they were planning on making 3D models for all the buildings and rendering them in the cities, just like Civ 4 did, and they just didn't have the time or the budget to do that, and the Colosseum ended up being the only one that they actually finished and made work. So, I always got the feeling that Civ 5 was pushed out the door a lot sooner than it should have been, and it was not anywhere close to being the vision that Soren Johnson, right?
Civ 5?
Yeah.
That was
John Schaefer. Yeah, I don't think that Civ 5 was anywhere close to the vision that John Schaefer had for it when he was designing it and they were working on the game. I really do think that 2K forced that game out the door long before it was ready.
Well, the problem is John Schaefer didn't have a very good vision for Civ 5, and it took a lot of work to get it fixed up.
Yeah, but even then, I don't think the released game was even close to what that vision was supposed to be.
Oh no, it was an alpha.
Yeah, and that's a shame.
Yeah, that's part of why it was rough in the beginning, but then great later. Like, once you polished it up and got all the edges that were supposed to be on there on the actual release thing, then it was great. But this is a more modern problem. They keep, not just Firaxis, but other companies. Even if the company themselves cares a lot about the game, their parent publishing company will tell them to put it out for a certain date. And then so they have to make that really tough decision between, I need to get this much of a complete game out the door, but I'm going to have to cut some things. I might have to cut some things that really matter.
Yeah, and for some developers, it's kind of a lose-lose situation, because on the one hand, you can have the publisher backing, but then you have the publisher demands, including, strict release dates, but then you try to do it indie on your own, and you just might not have the money or resources to complete that vision anyway. So, in a lot of cases, it can really feel like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. Very few game studios have the money and the clout to make their own game and self-publish it and fulfill their creative visions without significant compromises.
And I call this a modern problem. No, I think this has been going on at least since the 90s, but it was less obvious back then. We didn't have as much information about what was going on within the companies. You just saw it in the end product, and you're like, why would they put this out? And this is before it was so easy to patch things in, with like a day one patch and stuff.
Well, and because you couldn't just patch the game, like you had to release a stable quality product, otherwise it just wouldn't sell. You didn't have an opportunity to fix that.
The days before Steam.
Well, just the days before ubiquitous broadband internet.
Also, I'm glad Steam didn't exist for the 90s, because I don't need to know how many hours I put into some games in the 90s.
Yeah, that would be... I don't want to know how much I played SimCity 2000.
Oh yeah, SimCity 3000. I was a little bit... I played SimCity 2000 on the PlayStation, so I didn't play much of it because it was not nearly as good an experience on a console as it was on a PC. But I played a crap ton of SimCity 3000 and a uber crap ton of SimCity 4, and also, I will admit, I was a really big player of The Sims, the Sims and The Sims 2.
Mm-hmm.
I put so many hours into those games, too.
Well, The Sims and The Sims 2 were the ones that hadn't yet achieved full milking status.
Yeah, those were the good ones, for sure.
Yeah, that was 3 where it really started getting outrageous, but 3 still was some fun.
Here, buy this $40 DLC so you can have teenagers.
Which is, by the way, the exact same DLC that you had already bought for the previous game, and which we took out of the new game and are selling to you again for double the price.
Yes, because blah.
Oh, and it's only gotten worse since then with Sims 4.
Well, The Sims 4 also had some very bad bugs in it.
On top of cash cow syndrome.
I was thinking like illegal bugs.
Oh.
I remember a very specific bug that got a lot of publicity at the time that involves children and the woohoo.
Oh, yeah. That was the hello coding fail there. Oops. Someone forgot to check.
But yeah, let's move on to the next topic unless anybody else has anything more to say about Civ 4. Actually, the next topic kind of fits into this existing topic because
previous civs.
Yeah, it is a article from Kotaku, which I know save us all, but they list the best strategy games on PC, and they chose Civ 5 over Civ 6, and I kind of have to agree with them.
I kind of feel like you can't go wrong between 4, 5, and 6. Like, whichever one you pick, I can't really argue with you.
They all have good points.
My reasoning for picking Civ 5 has to do with the end game. Specifically, what happens when you reach the industrial era and beyond. Because the other games don't really address it very well at all. Civ 4 has favorite civics, which, is nice and all, but it doesn't really mean anything for the end game unless you have a Civ that loves police state. And then in Civ 6, you've got, you have a different government and it's a minor diplomatic debuff. Whereas in Civ 5, you were forced to pick one of the 3 ideologies, and it really mattered which side you went on, because all of your allies would be based on that. And it really made the game, in my opinion, more dynamic in the sense that old issues sort of faded away more commonly than you have in current.
Yeah, they suddenly didn't care as much what religion you were or, the trade routes you had in the past. It was, you're fascists and we're Democrats. No, this ain't going to work out, buddy.
Yeah, this is one of the times where Civ actually kind of reflected real world things. Religion and other things are less important, and now it's ideology that's more important, in how we interact with other countries.
Well, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, the religions were kind of the ideologies of the earlier phases of the game, and then it just moved away from being religious ideology to being political ideology.
Yeah, I I like that it's also a reflection of the real world, though, because it always comes up. Oh, that's not real world. Well, this is real world right here.
I think if they could take the climate change mechanics and disaster mechanics from Civ 6 and refine them a bit and put them in Civ 5, you would have the ultimate Civ game.
Yeah, I don't know about ultimate, but yeah, Civ 5 I think definitely did have the better end game compared to Civ 6 and maybe also even Civ 4. And it's not just the ideologies, but it was also things like, going for like the culture victory, you had all the museum themings and stuff like that. Like there was a lot more things for the player to actually do, a lot more decisions for the player to make later in the game that past games didn't have, and which Civ 6 I think did not adequately port over.
I still don't understand how culture victory works in Civ 6.
Yeah, it's
Like,
confusing.
Like, I don't think they explain anywhere how it works. I don't think even in the Civlopedia it explains how it works. Whereas in Civ 5, culture victory is not exactly the easiest thing to figure out, but it had a whole screen dedicated to it that told you what was going on. Whereas in Civ 6, it's a tab in the score panel, and it doesn't explain anything.
Yeah, it's like it really sticks out because the space race is broken down into achievable goals for you. Why do I not have a culture screen that's similar?
Yep.
I like the aesthetic of the Civ 6 UI, but I think the Civ 5 UI is more timeless.
Yeah, it's got that sort of classical thing going for it.
Yeah,
that Art Deco style.
Yeah.
It makes it feel like I remember reading before Civ 6 was even announced, Kotaku did a re-review of Civ 6 in 2016, and they basically came to the conclusion that all the ribbing that Civ 5 got for having its sort of, old-fashioned interface in terms of design was a really smart move, because all the games that went with modern UIs all look out of date now, but Civ 6 still looks the same and great. But yeah, the other games they listed on this list are Crusader Kings 3, which I don't know if that's really new enough or old enough to be considered the greatest strategy game.
Well, and it's interesting because they did go back to the older Civ game, but they did choose the newest Crusader Kings game, even though I'm sure there would be a lot of people, and I don't want to speak for him, but Phil might also say, no, 2 is better.
He hasn't played Crusader Kings 3, so I don't know if he would say that, but...
I have. I like it. It's good.
I've played Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3, and I think Crusader Kings 3 is better. It just doesn't have the content yet.
It's certainly a gentler learning curve, and the tutorial for Crusader Kings 3 is miles better than the tutorial for Crusader Kings 2. And I think even one of the problems with Crusader Kings 2 was that they added so much content post-release and didn't go back and update the tutorial for any of that new content or mechanics. So the tutorial is even worse and sometimes even more confusing because it's tutorializing mechanics that aren't really used anymore, or that are overwhelmed by the importance of other mechanics that it doesn't teach. And if my recommendation is, if you ever tried playing Crusader Kings 2 and were completely overwhelmed by it, and because of that experience you are afraid to try Crusader Kings 3, give it a shot. The tutorial is orders of magnitude better at teaching the game and at easing you into it, and it's a much simpler, more intuitive experience, in my opinion. Now, that might change once there's 100 DLCs for it, but we're not at that day yet, so if you're listening to this 5 years from now, maybe that's not the case anymore.
Now, I measured the difference between how much fun the streamers I've watched play it seem to be having with it, and there's so many more fun things they get to do with Crusader Kings 3, so it's I guess it's better than that, because these people are having way too much fun.
We also have Endless Legend, which, I don't know, as far as Endless games go, I think Endless Space 2 is better, but Company of Heroes, which I know nothing about.
I played that back in the day. It was pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to say on Endless Legend, if you're in the mood to do a fantasy type thing, it has Master of Magic vibes and stuff to it, so...
Oh yeah, there was a news article that Master of Magic is starting an open beta.
Oh, finally.
Or something like that. There was some news about it recently. but I did not put it on the list. And then we've got Total War Shogun 2.
Which I absolutely loved.
Which is an interesting choice considering that technically the newer Warhammer games are a lot more interesting to play, but then again, Shogun probably looks better.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of very good things about the Total War Warhammer games, but I never played them because I'm just not into Warhammer. So it's just, the theming is just not my thing. But as far as the historic Total War games go, like, Shogun 2, I think, is definitely, unless you want to go, like, classic and pick, like, you know, I think the first Rome was, like, really good as well. People really loved that, but
people still play that one, yeah.
Yeah, Shogun 2 was absolutely, for sure, my favorite of the Total War games. And not only was Shogun 2 good, but its expansions were also really good. The second expansion, Fall of the Samurai, was absolutely fantastic as well.
And then next on the list is Homeworld, which is a pretty good game. I haven't played it, but I know its history and what it plays like. It's basically, you know how most 3D space or most 2D space or most space-based RPG or RTSs with ships are 2D. Well, this one is actually 3D, and it's the only game that really does it in a way that works. And then there's Panzer Corps, which is kind of a remake of Panzer General, which Civ 5's combat system was based on. But I don't know if it really merits being on this list. World in Conflict, I played that game a lot when it first came out. That was a really good one. It's World War III, where the Soviet Union invades Washington State, and they're going. Basically, it's a very interesting game because it's got narration and the campaign is really good and the fighting is really good. XCOM 2, we all know. Age of Empires 2.
Yeah, 95% chance to hit. Boom, miss.
Hearts of Iron 4, which, why is that on this list? It's a terrible game.
Yes, if we are to believe Phil.
No, I have seen it. It is literally a broken game. It does not function.
I tried booting it up a few times. I could not make heads or tails of it.
Well, it's more of a logistics sim than a real strategic game, but it also has a lot of, like, the peace mechanics still don't work. You can fight a lot in a war, take most of the land against the Soviet Union, and still get nothing in the peace deal because you didn't lose enough troops to the enemy. It's so stupid.
Yeah, one of the things that Kotaku actually says about Hearts of Iron 4 is, quote, "It's an intentional logistical nightmare," unquote. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that you should be celebrating the game about if a big part of that nightmare is just the fact that so much of those logistics don't work.
It's not a logistical nightmare. The logistics are about the only part that do work.
Oh, it's just all the stuff built around it that's broken?
You have nations capitulating to the wrong nation. You have territory randomly being given to other countries, despite it being held by other countries or by third parties. You have peace mechanics or peace conferences where even if there's like 50 people on one side and 30 people on the other, and there's multiple nations that put in a lot of effort, the top two on the winning side get everything and the others get practically nothing because of the way that the war score system works. You have issues with the Navy, issues with army units not doing what they're supposed to do when you click on them. You have inconsistent input buffering. It's just a nightmare. And the logistics actually do work. You actually can build stuff, and it does go to your units on the front line. Easier than it probably you would imagine. But I think this list is a little bit weird, because here are the games that didn't make it onto the list. StarCraft 2.
What?
Command & Conquer Red Alert. Alpha Centauri. Warcraft 3. Europa Universalis 4. Desperados 3. Sid Meier's Colonization. Endless Space 2. And Unity of Command 2. And the Banner Saga. Now,
StarCraft 2 not being in there is a big what?
Yeah, I don't know how you can omit StarCraft 2.
Yeah, I mean, that's like so foundational to strategy, PC strategy gaming
modern
in general.
RTS and stuff. It is, it in Warcraft 3.
I mean, it was the competitive professional esport for like forever.
It's arguably the last one of its class too, because most games, there aren't a lot of RTSs like that being made anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, you can make a case for either of the StarCraft games as well, because I mean, both of them were, you know, monumental milestones in PC strategy gaming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you
also, if you have to have a Paradox title, EU4 is better than Hearts of Iron 4.
Well, they also have Crusader Kings 3 in there, so.
Well, yeah, but Crusader Kings 3 and EU4 are both good enough to fit on this list, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would like to throw out a small, an acknowledgement to a small indie strategy game, which I had played a few years ago and thought was really, really good, which was Ultimate General Gettysburg. It was obviously a Civil War game about, you know, just about the Battle of Gettysburg, not the whole war. It was just the Battle of Gettysburg. That game was really neat and had really good AI and had a lot of like back and forth mechanics. You know, there was a real ebb and flow to the battle. The map was just absolutely gorgeous. Like every location, you know, was like labeled and in these really attractive, vibrant visuals and graphics. As far as like low budget indie strategy games go, that one is definitely one of my absolute favorites.
I believe that one is made by a single guy.
Yes, and that too. It like I think one person made that game, and I think it might have been two people. I think there was a coder and an artist, so I think it was two people.
Probably.
But like, yeah, if we're talking about, you know, best PC strategy games ever, that I think is one of the best indie strategy games that I have ever played, and is as indie and low budget as it gets, but was absolutely incredible.
I mean, if we have to kick some of these off the list, I think the best option would be Panzer Corps and XCOM 2, and as much as I hate to say it, World in Conflict, because World in Conflict was good, but it was also not revolutionary. It was just kind of the epitome of of its type, which kind of died out. But StarCraft 3 and StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3 have to be on the list.
Yeah, and then there's, you know, also the question of whether or not you would consider a city builder to be a strategy game, because that's kind of a fuzzy classification, and if you want to go with that, then, like, you know, where the heck is SimCity 2000 or SimCity 4?
I would argue that a city builder is not a strategy game in the sense that you would class it with other games like 4Xs and RTSs, because there is strategy elements in a city builder, but you're not like fighting an enemy on the ground.
Yeah, there's no victory condition, no real conflict. It's a more they're definitely more of a sandboxy kind of game, but you know they can get very strategic and very deliberate and very thoughtful. So that's why I said it's kind of in a fuzzy gray area where maybe it's probably more on the side of no, but depending on the specific city builder as well, it could definitely go. Like there's also games like Banished, where, you know, which is a city builder game, but it's one of those ones where it has the seasonal cycle where you have to stockpile food and supplies to go through like the long winters, and like you can lose that game.
Yeah, I would argue that that's not even a city builder; that's a colony simulator. But
yeah, so then we're in another fuzzy area of classification.
The difference between a city builder and a colony simulator is a much more fuzzy gap. But I think in order for it to be a strategy game, I think it needs to have a tactical element to it. Like there has to be unit move or unit usage or something like that.
Yeah, and I would not disagree. I just brought it up while we're talking about the topic of things that might be missing. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of in a fuzzy gray area.
Also, where's Master of Magic 2? Or not Master of Magic 2, Master of Orion.
Yeah, space is, except for XCOM, space has kind of got ignored in this.
Yeah,
well, Homeworld as well, but still.
Yeah, and like you said, they also left off, Endless Space 2?
Mm-hmm. I think if you have to pick between Endless Space and Homeworld, you would pick Homeworld because it's more unique in its genre.
For sure, but if you had to pick between Hearts of Iron 4 and Endless Space 2...
Endless Space 2? Duh.
Endless Space 2, because Hearts of Iron 4 is the biggest stinker on the list.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Age of Empires 2 is the best Age of Empires, because I've never played any of those.
I think that's the general fan consensus.
Yeah, and it's still being played competitively, even if it's not like super big in the way that StarCraft gets played, but it's still going on. People are still playing. People just still play it because.
I think what kind of makes this hard is all of these games really don't fit neatly into they're not comparing apples to oranges. They're all strategy games, but a lot of them they all have different like scopes. So it's hard to compare them to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very difficult to compare something like Company of Heroes to Civilization.
It's like trying to compare Pokemon to Civilization.
Yeah, indeed.
Because Pokemon is also a strategic game that has tactical stuff in it, but it's definitely not in the same class.
Well, I mean, every game should have some element of strategy to it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to be really, really generous, you could technically say every game pretty much is a strategy game to some degree.
It's like, it was a discussion I had with my younger cousin years ago about what games technically classified as an RPG, because you're kind of playing a role in every game.
Well, and so many games now have, character advancement systems and skill systems, and like every game has it now. So that line is really blurred. But yeah, like talking about like strategy games, like sports games, right? Are sports games strategy games? Because they're games that, in a large part, model the strategy of playing a sport.
And I was going to go with StarCraft 2, partly an RPG, because you're following along a storyline with certain characters you play as, in a sense.
But do characters level up in StarCraft?
Yes.
Well, then it probably does have RTS elements, or RPG elements.
Yeah, which is it? Is it an RPG that you got your RPG and my RTS, or is it the other way around? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and then there's like Final Fantasy Tactics. Is that an RPG or a strategy game?
I would call that a tactics game, but I would also say it probably is an RPG as well.
Yeah, but I mean, tactics and strategy, that's another thing where you're talking about kind of there being a very fuzzy gray area between the two.
I don't know if I would call it a strategy game, actually.
But then, XCOM 2 would be?
XCOM 2 has the world map element to it.
Yeah. Well, I think Final Fantasy Tactics has an overworld campaign. It's been a long time since I've played Final Fantasy Tactics, so I don't remember much of it. But I'm pretty sure it also had an overworld campaign as well. I don't know how much strategy or thought went into it, but
I think it was pretty much giving items to characters and choosing which path to take to the next battlefield.
Yeah, it might have been a very just linear, series of tactical battles for you to do, which definitely is on a completely different scale than XCOM 2. But like I said, both of those are tactics games. The bulk of XCOM 2 is the tactical battling. So, again, kind of fuzzy.
Do you have any comments from the chat?
Yes, we have one comment from Green Hatter that just says Jesus.
Oh, well, that's not helpful, is it?
No, it is not.
Nope. If we knew what the timestamp was, I would have been like, hey, well, now we know what this is.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what that was in response to.
Why don't we move on to our actual Civ 6 related topic?
Yes, but keeping on the topic of strategy and decision making, we have a thread on Civ Fanatics started by Layrun called Strategic Resources and Potential Additions for Civ 7. This post is basically, listing some grievances and ideas for how strategic resources could and, maybe should work according to this poster. One thing is basically just asking for there to be more strategic resources, which is something that I, can't really argue with. One of the things that this person brings up is having copper actually be a strategic resource. And I'm kind of like, it was called the Bronze Age for a reason.
Yeah, I always wonder about that. Why is this a bonus resource and not even a luxury or something? Because a lot of things are ornamented with copper.
Yeah, in fact, I'm actually kind of, I've been mulling around the idea, for a while now, that instead of having ancient, classical, medieval, Renaissance, etc., that perhaps civilization's eras should be broken down by Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and then, maybe Renaissance and Industrial. If that might actually be a more appropriate way of delimiting between the different eras, because you have that shift in which resources are being used and which ones become dominant, not only militarily, but also culturally.
I'm going to say this and probably get yelled at a lot, but I don't think iron should be a strategic resource, because iron is very prevalent all over the world compared to copper.
It wasn't so much, I think, with iron, the availability of it, but the technology to properly cast it and, smelting and casting and all of that. That was the thing.
Yes.
They knew what iron was, but they had to develop the technology to properly make iron weapons.
Yeah, that's why they used bronze before they used iron. Bronze and iron are pretty comparable when it comes to strength and usability, except if you're in a situation that uses gunpowder. But the reason bronze was used was because it was easier to make bronze than it was to forge iron, because iron has specific requirements before it can be used well in a battle sense.
Yeah, something that would be a good grade for military weapons is different from just everyday cast iron or something like that. But you still kind of need a decent amount, especially if you're going to go into a military operation. You can't just have one small deposit of iron. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things where it's historical realism and gameplay are separated. They're doing that because they want that to be a decision.
Yeah.
But to Canus's point, I mean, we've also had some Civ games that have things like saltpeter or sulfur as a strategic resource that's required for building gunpowder units, and then other games where they're like, oh no, this stuff is common enough, you just get the gunpowder units without any strategic resource requirement. So it sounds like what Canus is saying is well, if they can do that for gunpowder units, why can't they just do that with, medieval knights and, pikes as well?
I think knights should require horses, but
I think they should require both, but yeah.
Yeah, that every time. It's like, I'm just building I magically made a horse out of iron, apparently. Because in previous Civs, I do believe it was that way.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot more interesting, especially in Civ 6, where you not only need to have the resource, but you have to have specific quantities of the resource. Mm-hmm. I think, honestly, I'm baffled that a knight in Civ 6 does not require 5 horses and 5 iron, as opposed to just 10 iron. Yeah. And similarly moving forward, like a battleship. Like, why does a battleship just need oil? How about a battleship requiring 10 oil and 10 iron?
I don't really like the quantified resources thing, but I recognize that it's a good mechanic.
Right, but if you're going to do it, and you
gotta do it right,
and you have units that are mixed, function, like a knight, right? It's not only that a knight is just a powerful infantry unit that requires iron, but it also has the extra speed of being a mounted unit. So it's a dual role unit, but it only requires the resource from one of those unit lines. And like stuff like that, like I said, is what really just baffles me that they didn't create this system to be a little more robust. Personally, I think a big thing that I would like to see change with strategic resources is I would like to see there be more domestic and economic uses for strategic resources, as opposed to them just all getting funneled into the military. And horses is a really good example, because I could easily see a system where you have the choice between either allocating your horses towards creating mounted military units, or you could, say, put them in your coliseums and have horse races for entertainment, or they could become a luxury item that's sold around your empire to wealthy elites, the equestrian class as they were called. And then other resources could be similar, like again, oil, very similar thing. You could use that in your cities for things like public transportation, or send it to a racetrack and have car races.
Ooh.
As opposed to just putting it in,
like that one.
Yeah, as opposed to just putting it in tanks.
Oh yeah, you get the oil resource and all your coliseums upgrade to racetracks. Yes, I like this plan.
Or optionally, like depending on what resources you put into it. Maybe you put horses. Even in the modern age, you put your horses, and it's a derby track, or you put oil, and it's a Grand Prix track.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Think the what is it? The Indianapolis Motor Speedway should be a great wonder.
Ooh.
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it.
I mean, it is the biggest sporting facility in the world, isn't it?
I don't know. Maybe Mackie can probably answer that more than I can.
Well, I don't know about sporting facility, but I think that whole complex, because it's basically 2 tracks in one, and the oval is so huge that there's all sorts of stuff in the infield and racing complex for sure. I don't know about sporting complex. There could be something in another country that's bigger than that.
Well, and it certainly wouldn't be unprecedented. I mean, Civ 6 has a soccer stadium as a late game wonder. The Estadio... what's it called? I forget what it's called.
I know what you mean, but I believe it's from Brazil.
Yeah, I think it's a Brazilian soccer stadium. I think they built it for the Olympics, so it was like a really big, really fancy one for the time it was built, which is why it shows up in the game as a wonder. But yeah, by the same logic, the Indy 500 could be one. And
it's been being held since automobiles were still pretty new, so, invent automobiles.
So according to the list of sports venues by capacity on Wikipedia, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the largest sports venue by capacity, with a capacity of 257,325 people.
Damn, and I thought football stadiums in Texas were big.
Oh, they are.
Yes.
There are very few stadiums in the world that are bigger than some of those college football stadiums. Well, also for Mackie's enjoyment, the Circuit de la Sarthe is the second largest with 234,800.
To be fair, though, a lot of that is because, when you're talking about like an auto race track, I mean, those things are like miles, several miles of circuit. So it's a lot of also area in which to put all those people. A football field is not miles long. So,
yeah.
I'm surprised one of the cricket ovals or something wasn't bigger, or at least on that level of big, because those are huge too.
Oh yeah, in India and in the UK, cricket is just like ginormous.
The largest cricket stadium is the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad, India. It is the largest stadium in the world with a capacity of 132,000 people, and it is, I want to say, like 15th or 16th on this list of places. Pretty close. It might even be the 20th. It's pretty far down on the list, behind a lot of other motor racing and horse racing facilities.
Yeah, because the track is so long, and you can fit more and more grandstands around them and stuff. Not to mention the general admission areas, which are standing areas that a lot of those places have. I was just going to say for the listeners, if you didn't know what the second track Candace was referring to, it's the longer extended circuit for Le Mans, which includes a lot of the French country roads around the actual proper part of smaller circuit, which runs other races, which is why you can have so many people, because you can just go stand on a hillside and watch a race.
And is that counted in the official capacity, or are they just counting seats?
I would imagine it's probably not, because isn't the Le Mans track like 5 or 6 miles long?
Yeah, but the proper, I want to call it stadium-ish part of it is a much smaller track, because they do shut down some of the roads just directly around that as part of the track.
Okay, so it probably doesn't include those numbers.
But the area that there is, you can fit a lot of people.
Like the first football stadium is easily 40 or 50 down the list. And it's North Korea's 1st of May Stadium, which I don't believe has ever been filled.
And I'm sure that's a soccer stadium, not a gridiron American football stadium.
Right. And then the largest football stadium, or American football stadium, is the Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor, which is 2 below.
Yeah.
Really? That one's the biggest? I thought for sure it was one of the ones in Texas.
The next biggest American football stadium is Beaver Stadium in Penn State, or in State College, Pennsylvania, I guess. And then you've got Ohio Stadium in Columbus, Kyle Field in Texas, and then Knoxville, and then Baton Rouge, and then Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, it's all the college stadiums because it's outdoor and it's easier to put a lot more grandstands in than it is for the actual more arena-style ones like AT&T Stadium here where the Cowboys play. Which it probably seems bigger when you see it on TV because it has those gigantic screens in the middle and stuff, but the actual capacity is not that huge.
Yeah, it's mostly college football teams rather than NFL teams.
And the pro stadiums also have a lot of like luxury boxes and press facilities that the college stadiums don't necessarily have, which means there's just more room for, average seating. But anyway,
on a divergent topic, with resources, next time we have oil, let me build racetracks, thanks.
Yeah, and that's been an idea I've had for a long. And the only resource that I think Civ does anything like that with is with uranium and using uranium to power nuclear power plants. So
and coal and oil.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, you're right. Civ 6 did do that with all the energy producing resources. So yeah, but so if they can do it with some of them, they can do it with any or all of them.
Yeah, I would like to see more of the resources, whether it's luxury or bonus or strategic, have alternate uses. Why is copper not, like in the early game, why is copper not also luxury? Because people like to decorate things.
Yeah, and also just like you're getting at, also having more of a blending, right, between some of the strategics and some of the luxuries. Because like I said, like horses could also easily be considered a luxury resource that, the wealthy elites buy and ride horses and, have equestrian sports and stuff like that the, plebs don't really have access to.
Iron is great for making like cast iron cooking utensils. Maybe you get a little extra food out of it if you have a city that has iron in its borders.
That is a pretty commonly spread resource, though. I mean, pretty much everybody does have cooking resources, so that one's a little bit harder to justify, and I can't really think of any real good examples, but, I mean, yeah, sure. Another interesting idea that the poster in this topic had is to have lithium as a late-game strategic resource for powering batteries. And, yeah, that could be an interesting thing where you maybe use lithium as like an alternative to your other energy-generating resources like uranium and coal and stuff like that and oil, where you put lithium on like your wind farms and your solar farms and maybe your hydroelectric plants, and it increases their output.
That makes sense. Like it's an upgrade to, like if you've already built a solar in that city, but if you put in what would be a lithium-ion battery upgrade, then you generate more because it's not, you get more energy overall, not because you're generating it, because you're banking the extra energy.
Right, because the way it works in real life is, you have a solar panel. Obviously, that solar panel doesn't work at night, right?
Right.
But it almost always generates an excess of, well, depending on the panel and the use and stuff like that, but a lot of them generate an excess during the day, because during the day, on a clear day, where, you would mostly want to put solar panels, the Earth gets a lot of sunlight.
Yeah.
So you store that in a battery, and if the battery capacity is large enough, that can potentially run the same amount of capacity overnight when the sun is not shining. And it's the same with wind farms. You store it in some kind of battery, and when the wind's not blowing, you discharge from the battery, and then you maybe have a coal or oil fired plant, somewhere that picks up any slack if there's still not enough capacity. But if you don't have the battery at all, then you're basically just running your solar panels during the day, and then all night long you have to have, a fossil fuel as a backup.
Well, there's some more things for the whole climate change thing there in the late game, too.
Yeah, and Civ 6 in particular, one of the issues that I had with its climate change mechanics was it is a little too easy to tech ahead to get the renewable resources. Like hydroelectric power is available pretty early in the modern eras of the game, and there are so many rivers on Civ 6's map that it's really easy to have a nation, an empire that's completely powered by hydroelectric power before you've even unlocked the ability to build coal-powered plants. And then if you're really ahead,
it's weird that you can do it before coal because coal came first, but hydroelectric is relatively simple. in terms, I mean, it's a lot of engineering to build a concrete dam, but then the actual power generation part is relatively simple.
Right, but
we've been building water-powered mills for thousands of years.
Oh, I mean, that goes back to ancient Rome and Greece, I think, even. So
I think it goes back to China before that, but yeah.
Yeah, and maybe also even Egypt might have had some water-powered grain mills and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't know about Egypt because I think Egypt has that flooding problem. Like, I think they didn't really build much stuff.
You might be right, but there's also like the smaller tributaries and stuff like that don't flood as much, which could have been candidates for something. I don't know. Maybe they did. I mean, as my understanding is the ancient Egyptians had indoor plumbing, so they must have had also the capability of pumping stuff as well. So
even if it was powered by literal people power, or if you just had a water thing that would do the pumping for you, but we didn't use it. We didn't use that technology of that for electricity until we figured out what electricity was. So,
interesting piece of trivia that I learned recently is there was apparently a classical Roman inventor who actually created a prototype steam engine.
Hero of Alexandria.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a novelty, right? It was like a decorative, like, ooh, look what I can do kind of thing, because nobody else in the scientific or engineering community ever thought there would ever be any practical applications for a steam-powered motor.
They were like, well, what is this thing?
It's more that the infrastructure required to make use of a steam engine did not yet exist.
Yeah, there's that too.
There's a lot of alternate history stories that I have read about what happened if the Romans industrialized, and a lot of them fail to recognize that just inventing the steam engine does not build all of the infrastructure that society needed before it could even get to the point where a steam engine was used. There are certain labor requirements and technological advancements that predate the invention of predate the beginning of the Industrial Revolution that aren't dependent on just the steam engine.
Right, and because so much labor was needed for agriculture in particular, just to feed everyone, it was really hard to take that labor away and, allocate them to industrial purposes.
Oh no, labor was not a problem in the ancient world. They had a lot of slaves, and they kept every time they conquered people, they just made them into slaves. So part of the reason why nobody worked into developing the steam engine or anything needed for it was because slave labor was cheaper.
Yeah, that's true too.
Why do I want to spend these expensive materials on the steam engine that only replaces a handful of workers when for that amount of money I could have a nation of workers?
Yeah,
practically. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, lithium as a strategic resource, I could totally get behind that as another late game resource. And that would be something that wouldn't even have a military application.
Well, you could give it while we replace some of our units' cost with lithium instead of using oil, because if we can make electric war vehicles, who's to say we couldn't do that?
Is lithium... Yeah, we have our electric plug-in hybrid tanks.
Under the assumption that you could actually use lithium on an industrial scale, there probably is a way to do it. We just haven't figured it out yet.
And I mean, if you have a civilization game that's going up to the year, that goes another 50 or 100 years into the future, I mean, yeah, sure. You can have maybe a one of those advanced future tank units that is, electrically powered. What was I going to say? Yeah, is lithium also used for computer chip parts?
I was not lithium, but I was gonna mention gold and silver end up in a lot of microchips. And what's the other? There's another one I can't think of that's also maybe
tungsten.
Yeah, there's other. Particularly with gold and silver, those are valuable previously for decorative purposes and luxury, but it could become a strategic resource in the late game if you're using a lot of computerized things.
Yeah, for example, a military drone, right? Like Civ 6 had, the scout line eventually upgrades to an unmanned drone, and that could totally be something that requires, gold as a strategic resource for. And maybe also lithium, because it's going to have batteries too.
Yeah.
Basically, any of the noble metals can be used in those contexts, like platinum, osmium, wolfram, gold, and silver. And I think there's a couple others. Oh, did I call it wolfram? Whoops. Wolfram is tungsten. That's the old word for it.
There's a post, a few posts down from Linklight that says, the concern that I have is that I already find it hard to obtain strategic resources. So, kind of getting at the idea that having more is just going to make it harder to find them. But inversely, depending on how it's designed, if you have more strategic resources, it means you potentially have more alternative options. So if you have a viable alternative to, for example, iron, right? Like if bronze is a functional strategic resource into the medieval era, where you can still make bronze swords and spears and pikes and stuff, but maybe they're not quite as good, then you're not under as much pressure to find iron or just be screwed for the medieval era.
Alternately, it could give you a reason to not be a turtle. Not that everybody is a turtle player, but I know a lot of people who don't like strategic units because they don't like to have to fight wars.
Yeah, that too.
If the later game strategic units are all in a place where you don't have any, getting off your proverbial laurels and going and fighting somebody to get that is a good reason for the player to go to war if they don't feel like they need to or want to.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, there's also kind of like the circular thing where if you don't have the resources, you can't build the units to be competitive against the civs that do have the resources. So you also kind of are in a position where maybe you just can't go to war. So,
well, the trick for that is you always make the resources that make units, like other than iron, copper, and horses, which should be abundant enough that everybody should be able to get them fairly easily.
At least at least a small quantity.
Yeah. You would need to make it so that the later ones, like saltpeter and aluminum and uranium and
oil.
Whatever else, oil and all those things, they need to be made visible on the map early enough that a civ at parity would be able to prosecute a war against another nation before that lack of
becomes a deal breaker.
Yeah, before they become too powerful.
Yeah, you have to know. You have to know that you're not going to have access to that important resource early enough ahead to go and get it before it, you're well into its window of opportunity where everybody else who has it is stopping you from getting it.
And I think for the most part that happens now. I think
in Civ 6.
I believe that the resources do appear early enough for that to be functional. But part of the problem with that is that where you are on the tech tree is not always the same. Like, there are branches on the tech tree that can sometimes take a lot of work to traverse in the other direction. So, if you're taking the top path, it may be hard to get to the bottom path, and only one of them reveals the resource. It requires you to go down certain specific tech paths.
Yeah, another comment that I'm seeing on this thread is people are also bringing up the fact that a lot of strategic resources become useless after their, respective eras. And, that's also why I really like the idea of having those later game domestic purposes for them, so that you transition from using strategic resources for military purposes to being more of a domestic or, economic resource. So they still have some function and some utility later in the game, and there's still value in having more of the resource. And, not just selling it all away to, whatever tech or whatever civ is an era or two behind you and still uses them.
Maybe just flat bonuses to yields?
Yeah, I mean, that could be it too. Or, again, like having some kind of resource allocation system where you decide where they go and which resources go where, and, maybe they buff certain buildings or certain infrastructure. There's a lot of different ways it could be done.
I would argue against a system like that simply because it's extra complication that doesn't really help that much.
I would certainly see something like that working better with Civ 5 system, where you have like you have a set quantity of resources that you can spend, as opposed to Civ 6 where you're accumulating that resource. For Civ 6 it should be more automatic. You just build a building that consumes the resource and that's it. Because otherwise it's a lot more micromanagement. But in a case like in Civ 5 where you have 5 iron, right, and that's it, or we'll go with an easier example. You have 5 oil, right? Like you say, okay, one of those oils is going to go to my auto racetracks, and one of those oils is going to go towards public transit in my largest cities, and then now I've got 3 oil left over to build some, tanks and airplanes and stuff like that. And that's a lot easier to handle than, oh, I'm getting 5 oil per turn, and every turn I have to decide where that oil's going. Yeah, definitely don't want that.
We don't need another trade route interface problem.
No. But speaking of trade, we could also have mechanics where the resources are actually sent along those trade routes, too, which could be interesting. I know
I think
Beyond Earth did that.
Even in Civ 6, I think you do get bonuses if the destination or source cities have resources that the others don't.
Yeah, that's true. The resource itself does not travel, though. But it could be interesting if you have a trade route that is carrying oil, whether it's automatically allocated or you have some manual process where you have to put it on the trade route, and then a enemy party pillages it and gets that oil.
That would be annoying.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's better on the abstracted layer because the trade routes don't move fast enough for it to make sense unless it was going to be like, oh, you sent a trade route that takes 30 turns to complete, and on the 30th turn, the other person gets all 50 of the oil that you've sent them by trade, and whoops, somebody pillaged it, so you don't get any of that oil. Yeah,
you definitely have to have a different trade route system that would not require as much micromanagement and babysitting as what is required in Civ 5 and especially in Civ 6.
I think the trade route system is fine. It's just not useful enough for me to bother. Like, if it gave better yields, it would be worth the trouble to go through all that rigmarole. But as it is now, it's kind of like, you get +2 hammers and +1 food on one side and nothing on the other side. Like, why bother?
Another example that I'm seeing from Casper GM is using niter as a strategic resource that is used for creating chemicals and fertilizers. So it would be a strategic resource that boosts food yields.
I believe it already does.
I think it's a passive thing where you just research the tech and it kind of just gives you a bonus to farms and pastures and stuff. I don't think you actually have to... it doesn't consume the resource to get more food or whatever.
Well, we're not on Nauru. Phosphates are not limited. For anyone who doesn't know, Nauru is a Pacific island that ruined their environment by mining their phosphate. Oh. Also, foreign corporations helped with that.
Oh, well, color me shocked.
But yeah,
both the natives and the corporations are culpable in that story. It's very sad, but
yeah, other ideas for strategic resources that are used for non-military applications is metals like iron and stuff like that could go towards the steel for building skyscrapers, could go towards building automobiles. In an abstract sense, of course. I don't want to obviously have something where you have to manufacture individual cars for people to drive. Oil being used to create plastics, which you could turn into luxury products in the form of things like toys and other consumer goods.
I feel like that's kind of getting lost in the weeds.
Maybe. I would really like to have more things to think about with how I'm using my resources, as opposed to just, do I build a tank or an airplane? Especially on those games where I am turtling and I don't have a need for the military. Like, pretty much the only thing you do with those resources, especially in Civ 6, where you're constantly accumulating them, is just every few turns, will anyone buy these things? Because I'm not doing anything with them. It just would be really nice to have something else to do with them.
Oh, I just let them roll over and just lose them because it doesn't matter to me, but I also don't play at a high level, so...
Well, that ends up being what usually happens with my excess, because it is just too much of a pain in the butt to be going every few turns to every other leader and trying to sell them the stuff, but also you do that enough times, and then every other leader has stockpiles of the resource and just won't buy any more anyway.
Yeah.
Especially in Civ 6, where the AIs have that frustrating issue where they kind of just stop building military units at certain points of the game.
All right. Have we reached the end of the topic?
I think we have.
All right. And this is now the end segment of the show. I would like to mention one thing, if I may. One of the members of my family has recently announced that they are making a video game. and they are starting a Kickstarter later this year. And we will put a link in it, but it is somebody who you probably have heard of if you've ever played Hollow Knight.
Cool.
They have a nice trailer out, so...
Hooray for more games by people who actually care about games. Anyway, this has been episode 399 of PolyCast. I'm Makahlua. With me today, CanusAlbinus.
Oh, whoops.
And MegaBearsFan.
One of these days, I will get the Wordle on the first guess, if I just keep using the same word.
I don't think that'll work.
Yeah, that's going to be a while.
Civilization 3, 4, 5, Beyond Earth, and 6 sound clips. Copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright the PolyCast at thepolycast.net.